Watch a left-handed person sign their name. The paper turns almost sideways. The wrist curls up and over the line, like they are writing around a corner. And when the pen lifts, there it is, a soft gray smear along the outside edge of the hand, running from the pinky down to the wrist. They wipe it on their jeans without looking. They have done that 10,000 times. Now ask them why they turned the paper like that. Most of them will say they never really thought about it. They just learned. Learned what, though? Stay with me, because the answer has almost nothing to do with the hand. Left-handedness usually gets treated like a party fact, about 1 person in 10. Isn't that neat? But the hand is the smallest part of the story. What you are actually looking at is a brain that organized itself a little differently, dropped into a room built for somebody else, and then quietly translating ever since. Today, the psychology of left-handed people. Start with the objects, because that is where it lives. The scissors in the kitchen drawer. Right-handed scissors put the top blade on the right, which means the cutting line is hidden behind the blade when you hold them in your left hand. So you squeeze sideways to see, or you give up and learn to cut with your right. The spiral notebook binding that presses into your forearm for 4 years of school. The ladle that pours away from you. The can opener that turns the wrong way. The card reader at the checkout, angled toward the other side of the counter, so you reach across your own body while the person behind you waits. The desk in the lecture hall, with the little writing arm bolted to the right. None of these are dramatic. That is the point. Each one costs you half a second and a small correction, and there are dozens of them in a day, and nobody ever sees a single one. Here's the part that gets under the skin, though. You do not experience any of that as the world being awkward. You experience it as you being awkward. At dinner, you take the seat on the end. Not because anyone asked. Because you already know your elbow will find someone else's elbow, and you would rather not be the reason a table has to shuffle. You apologize before it happens. Sorry, I'm left-handed, like it is a small confession. It shows up in tiny places. Somebody hands you a pair of scissors, and you feel your hand hesitate for a beat before you take them. You sign a form at a counter and shift your whole body to get the pen at the right angle. You hand back a receipt with ink on the side of your palm and say sorry for that too. Sound familiar? That reflex is the actual subject of this video, not the hand, the apology. So where does the difference start? This is where it gets interesting, because the honest answer is not the one you have heard. The two halves of your brain do not split work evenly. In most right-handers, the machinery for language sits pretty firmly on the left side. That much is settled. In left-handers, it is looser. Most left-handers still run language mainly on the left, same as everyone else. But a noticeably larger share of them run it across both halves at once, or lean to the right instead, less committed to one side. Researchers call it weaker lateralization, which sounds like a flaw and is really just a description. Some researchers think that spread-out arrangement can be useful after an injury to one side, since the work is already partly shared. That one is still argued about, so hold it loosely, and it is not a switch somebody flipped in you. Handedness runs a little in families, but there is no single left-handed gene. It looks like dozens of small genetic nudges, plus whatever happens before you are born. Identical twins, same DNA, can end up with different dominant hands. About 1 pair in 5 does. So nobody chose this for you, and you did not choose it either. Now, before you decide this makes you the creative one, let me take something away from you. You have heard that left-brained people are logical, and right-brained people are artistic. That idea came from real science, and then got wrecked on the way out. In the 1960s, Roger Sperry studied patients whose 2 hemispheres had been surgically disconnected to control severe epilepsy. He won a Nobel Prize for it. What he found was specialization, not personality. Then a magazine got hold of it, and 50 years later, people are still taking quizzes about which half of their brain they use. You do not use half a brain. Nobody does. Every ordinary thing you do runs across both sides, constantly, over a bridge of nerve fibers with hundreds of millions of connections. So no, being left-handed does not hand you creativity. Sorry. What it does hand you is a brain slightly less rigid about which side handles what, and a childhood spent operating equipment designed for the other body. Hold on to that second one. It matters more than the first, because here is the part that explains the apology. The shame is older than you are. Look at the words. The Latin word for left is sinister. It still means what it means. The French word for left is gauche, and English borrowed it to describe someone clumsy in a room. Dexterous comes from the Latin for right. In English, right is both a direction and a synonym for correct. That is not a coincidence. That is a few thousand years of one group being the default. And it was not only vocabulary. Well into the 20th century, in schools across Europe, America, and much of Asia, left-handed children were made to write with the right hand. Hands were tied down. Knuckles were wrapped. There are people alive right now with beautiful right-handed handwriting who were born left-handed and switched at 6 years old. Your grandmother might be one of them. Ask her sometime. Ask which hand she started with. Most of those children were not being punished for a mistake. They were being corrected toward the normal. That is a different kind of message, and it travels further. It says the problem is not the writing. It says the problem is the body doing it, which means the flinch you feel when someone watches you write is not paranoia you invented. It is a very old message that arrived before you did, and you still do the small things. You angle the page away from the person next to you. You cover your handwriting with your other hand. You check the edge of your palm for ink before you shake someone's hand. Have you ever noticed how much of that you do without deciding to? But here is the part nobody tells you about that 10%. It has been 10% for a very long time. Look at the hand stencils on cave walls, the ones made by blowing pigment around a hand pressed to the rock. Most of them are left hands, because the right hand was doing the spraying. The ratio in the archaeological record sits close to what it is in your office today. That is strange. Traits that stay rare for tens of thousands of years usually stay rare for a reason. The most discussed explanation comes from Charlotte Forey and Michel Raymond, evolutionary biologists in France. Their argument is about surprise. In a fight, in any contest where two people face each other, being the rare one is an advantage. Your opponent has practiced against everybody else, almost never against you. They found left-handedness more common in societies with higher rates of violent conflict. You can still see the echo of it. Boxing, fencing, tennis, cricket, baseball. Left-handers show up at rates well above 10% in nearly every sport where you face an opponent directly. Not because the left hand is stronger, because nobody trained for you. And then there is the quieter advantage, the one that comes from all that daily friction. Ask a left-handed person which hand they use for scissors, for a computer mouse, for opening a door, dealing cards, using a tool they borrowed. A lot of them will say the right one, without pride, because that was simply the equipment available. Now ask a right-handed person how often they use their left hand for anything that requires aim. Watch them think about it. That gap is the whole thing. You did not decide to be flexible. You were handed a world in one setting and no option to change it. So you built the workaround over and over at 7 years old, at 9, at 15. You were trained, badly and without consent, into a second hand. They never were. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not clumsy. You were never holding it wrong. The scissors were made for someone else's grip, and you learned to cut anyway, and then you apologized for the sound they made. Being left-handed does not make you a genius or an artist, and you should be a little suspicious of anyone selling you that. What it did was put you, very early, in a repeating situation. The standard way did not fit your body, and you had two options every single time. Give up on the task or find a second way. You found the second way, thousands of times, before you were old enough to notice you were doing it. That is not a personality trait. It is a habit worn into you by 10,000 small failures of design. So when you walk into a system that was clearly not built with you in mind, some part of you does not panic. It just starts looking for the angle, the sideways grip. The other hand, you already know the first way is not the only way. Most people have to be taught that. Do you see how early you learned it? You were taught it by a pair of scissors. I want to know which object still beats you. The can opener, the spiral notebook, the checkout terminal, the ruler with the numbers running backward. Leave it in the comments. And if you were switched as a kid, or your parent was, tell me that story. I read them. And the next time you catch that gray smear along the side of your hand, try not to wipe it away so fast. That is not a mistake on your skin. That is the mark of someone who kept writing anyway. Subscribe to keep decoding yourself, and I'll see you in the next.